Hi, everyone. I'm with Andrew Hansen and Sarah Young from Digital Worth, and I'm Chris Rempel from The Lazy Marketer. Today, we are talking about ChatGPT and all the insane things that it means for our collective futures, especially as marketers, content creators, etc. And so, anyway, what we thought is, without much planning and almost no structure, we would just dive into a quick conversation and talk about what all this stuff means. So we're going to approach it from two uh, perspectives. One is we'll spend 15 minutes talking about what does this mean in the near term. So the next 6 months, how does this impact us basically right now? What are we seeing? How are we using it ourselves already? And kind of what are the near term things to be aware of? And then we'll hit the timer will go off and we'll start the second part on what are the longer term implications? Where's all this headed? What are the second order effects and possibilities? And in some ways, a lot of people are saying this is kind of like this is like the new mobile. This is a new paradigm. It's almost like the invention of the printing press in some ways. How will this impact society? How will it impact business? What do we need to be aware of? So anyway, I will go ahead and press the timer here. We're at 15 minutes on near-term impacts. Sarah, why don't I start with you? What do you see in the next 6 months this impacting? And you're from the programming background. Maybe walk us through what you see happening in the world of programming in the near term.
Okay, so I'm using ChatGPT already for programming. I regularly give it tasks to do, and it writes the code for it. So tasks that used to take me a whole day to program now take about a half hour. I just tell ChatGPT what I want it to do and what language to write it in, and it's a matter of copy and paste, and then tweaking some things. Uh, it's amazing for small tasks, small tools. If you're somebody's involved in writing very complicated code, I don't think we're there yet, but it's coming. But for small, very specific tasks, ChatGPT is really great for it. So what I'm seeing now is that let's say I would want to outsource a task to another programmer. Instead of doing that, I would just give it to ChatGPT. Instead of working a whole day on writing code, I would just give it to ChatGPT, and it's doing a really good job. It's really helping me get a lot done in terms of
That's unreal.
programming. It's amazing. I love it.
So it's like, I guess to dig in a little bit on that, like let's say um, as a total non-programmer, but let's say you're building out like an authentication flow for a new app or something like, can you get to kind of 80% of it with chat GPT and then the rest, the 20% has to be you or has to be thought through or is it even more than that?
Okay, so the process basically I've seen the process being like this. I tell it what I want it to do, and again, it has to be something small and specific. It can't be a whole complicated set of code, but something small. I was telling you earlier. For example, I needed a script that would go through an entire folder with a lot of documents and extract domain names from there. So that's a very
Mm.
simple, specific task. So basically, I say in English, I tell ChatGPT what I want, and I don't even have to say it so nicely. Like, please, could you just tell it? Some people do that. I basically just say, write a script, tell it which language that does this, that goes through folders, finds the files with these names and extracts domain names. It will give me the code, which I can copy and paste and try it. Sometimes it works straight out of the box. Sometimes it doesn't because there's an error. If there's an error, I go back to it and I say, well, I got this error. And sometimes it will say, I'm sorry, there was a mistake here, and it rewrites the code. One time it told me it was my fault, and it really was, like I wasn't using it properly.
It talks
And
back.
it does, yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
And on some occasions, the code just won't work, and I'll have to go to Google and find out what the error means and why it's acting the way it does, and I'll fix it. So I would say, again, for small specific tasks, it would do somewhere between, I don't know, 85 and 100% of the work.
Wow. Wow. So, I mean, we've kind of had, and we were discussing this before the call, like there's some no code stuff out there like Zapier and Webflow and others. And it's really more like pre-written recipes and you can kind of build really basic things. But this is another level. We're talking, this thing knows how to like from the ground up create stuff from scratch.
Right. It knows so many things that like in the background, meaning I had it write a WordPress plugin. So I said, write a WordPress plugin that does this. So it knew what WordPress is. It knew in what language to write it.
Wow.
It knew how to write it so it fits in with the rest of WordPress. It knew what database names and table names WordPress uses. It has all that information, puts it all together with its coding ability and spits out the code. That worked 100% out of
Wow.
ChatGPT into WordPress.
Please create a WordPress plugin that will break all my other plugins every time I update it.
I have one like that.
Yeah, I feel like all mine do that already. That's fantastic. I mean, that's insane. I mean, I think there's a lot to cover in the second half on implications there, but maybe let's move to content. Andrew, on the publishing front with all of your website operations, everything that's happening, um, maybe tell me about, I mean, obviously the content creation part, but also the workflow in behind, and you mentioned a few things on that. So I'm curious to hear how you're using ChatGPT for your current process today.
Yeah, so I'll talk about some of the specific applications, but just broadly first, thinking about like the effects that have already happened now. All of us in the content business have been wondering for some time about AI content and how broad it is, how much of it really is out there. And I remember talking about this even a year ago. Sarah and I would be doing research in different niches, and we'd see sites come up, and we'd look at them and say, "Hey, look at this site. This is obviously an AI content site, and look how well it's doing. It's getting all this traffic." And one of the ways we could identify it was really basic. We just looked at the content and you could read it, and any human, especially who creates content, could quickly see, oh, this is AI generated content. And from then until now we come across sites, and this happened actually just yesterday. I found a niche site that seemed to be doing really well, and I looked at the content and I was like, oh yeah, that's humanish kind of content. The site had a lot of articles, and there was some other kind of irregularities that were more analytical, just some things in the number of pages they'd published in the certain amount of time, or something about their link profile, or whatever it might have been. I sent it to Sarah and I was like, this site seems to be doing really well. What do you think about this site? And she checked it with one of these AI checkers at the moment, and that revealed that it was actually 99% AI content. So when I looked at it the first time, I was like, oh, that's okay. That content's okay, but it sort of has a personal tone to it, and it looks human enough. I didn't immediately think it was AI, and basically that's how good the AI content is now, and thinking about how far it goes, how much of it there is out there. There's probably an enormous amount in a lot of the niches that we and a lot of the people listening, I think, would operate in. And so I think all content producers now are sort of scrambling to try to think about how you can integrate this technology without and have it improve your workflows and your output to reduce your content costs or whatever, but without the risks, because we still don't know yet how Google is going to judge this content. We were talking a lot about that before we came onto the call. It remains to be seen what how Google is going to judge it, what version of content written by AI will turn out to be acceptable on what kinds of topics in what kind of niches. So everybody is dabbling at the moment, trying to sort of dip their toe in the water and try these different things to improve the content we're creating without without crossing any sort of lines. So on that front, coming back to the specific examples, like we've been using it a lot this last month, starting out by creating article outlines. So every time a writer creates a piece of content, they need a brief. We always give writers a brief that tells them what we want written, how we want the article to turn out, which points it should cover, and so on. And this step in the process, everyone does this differently, but our process for this was a little bit manual. I did a lot of this myself because I wanted it to be really perfect. And now you can go to ChatGPT and say, write me an outline for a 1,000-word article on this really specific topic. Make sure you cover this point and use informal language, whatever. You can have it create the perfect outline for you. And you can even ask it to add instructions for each section that would help a writer researching and writing this article. So you can get an outline at the end with instructions in it that you can send directly to a writer, and that can appear immediately rather than you having to piece it together one bit at a time. There is, of course, still checks that need to be done. If you're in the SEO side, you'll want to tweak this a lot to make it perfect and add some other data from other places. But it's, as far as making the framework and doing it really quickly, yeah, it's game changing. That's of course just one really small task, but a very practical one that anyone creating content can be using, and a lot of people will be using kind of immediately.
Well, it's massive. I mean, even like for, let's call it entry-level content, like you can't get away from spending 20 minutes describing what you want written, right? Like until now, I mean, everything, through all the years I've been in this as well, like, until you get really tied in or you get a really good relationship with the writer and they kind of know what you're doing, and then they can kind of pitch you on ideas. Until you get to that, it's a lot of forward work, right? It's a lot of this like you say, putting together briefs. And good God, I mean, that alone, forget the content, actual production, like just the middle work. Like if that reduces 80% of that, I mean, that's phenomenal. And we were kind of like, this is a near-term thing, but like, are we heading into kind of an immediate content singularity where it's just like, well, if a site was creating 10 articles a month, now it's creating 1,000, or even just times 3 for the sake of whatever, okay, from 10 to 30, now times that by every active publisher out there, right? And what's the impact on the index? What's the impact on all? I mean, I'll put it to you guys. What do you think in the near term? What do we see from a niche site publishing perspective? Like, is this like in some ways a race to the bottom? Like how do you see it?
Yeah, I think a lot hangs on what comes next with how the search engines will judge this content. So that we've talked about this story that's been big in SEO the last couple of weeks, where these big publishers, Bankrate and CNET, came and disclosed the fact that they had been using AI for their content. And the next step is what Google does in reply, how are they going to choose to judge that content. If the rest of the SEO world gets the message that AI content is okay, like if there's no negative effect from this, if it's okay to publish a piece of content that's 66% or 80% AI generated for certain niches and on certain topics, then the floodgates open, and we could see within, who knows, in 6 months or a year, some sort of content singularity where, yeah, the sites who are publishing 3 articles a day are now publishing 30 articles or 300 articles a day, and then who knows what happens.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sarah.
We're already seeing that Google is trying to judge and figure out what it wants to do with it. I'm following the Google guidelines and the rating guidelines, and they're changing them as we speak. Like it used to say that you can't use automatically generated content. Now he says you can't use spammy automatically generated content, meaning some is okay. And generally what they want to see is good content, and we're still trying to judge what is good content. And I'm guessing it will be a content that's a combination of AI and a human editor who makes sure that it's good and adds their own experiences and anecdotes and opinions, which AI can't do. So I think that content will get generated faster in the coming months with the use of AI, but I don't think we're getting to a point where all content will be generated by AI and humans will have no part of it. I don't think that we're going there.
Just to add one piece into play there, sorry to interrupt, Chris.
No.
It's easy to imagine the trust of a site playing a huge role in what comes next. So it's one thing for CNET or Bankrate to publish content that's 60% or 80% AI generated, because their domain name has built up so much authority. They're generally trusted. They know it's being edited heavily. It has whatever link profile, whatever history and age and everything else. That's one thing. It will not be the same thing for some new niche site that's a year old that has 15 links to publish 80% AI generated content, even if the quality is exactly the same. So yeah, whatever the effects are, we'll see them first with these big sites, and much later, I have to think, with smaller, newer sites.
So you're saying that my easyforexriches.info might have a more difficult time in the
No,
beginning?
that's a very authoritative site. I would never make any judgment about that domain name.
Thank you. I think it's very credible. So we hit time there for the kind of shorter term impacts. But before we move to the next round, anything that was kind of on your mind, anything we want to say right now on the short term?
Yes and no. Maybe for the sake of brevity, we just keep rolling.
Those were my thoughts in my mind as you were asking the question.
We can come back to closing thoughts that will encapsulate all of it. All right. So on the longer term time horizon, maybe I'll start with this one. I think it's inevitable, and based on kind of chatter on Twitter and people using this that I talk to personally or whatever, all of us, I think, a common piece of feedback from a lot of folks is that, hey, you know what? I've been using ChatGPT for a lot of things that I used to go to Google for, right? So it's actually replacing search. It's replacing the search box as kind of what we've all used as the internet gateway for decades now. ChatGPT is legitimately threatening the search box as a business model. And I think for a lot of queries in a lot of different categories, there's no question that having a concise 2 to 3 paragraph answer that's generated credibly with footnotes and stuff, that's just such a better user experience than here's a bunch of web links that you have to go open with a bunch of ads, right? And for Google, if they're looking at this, I would have to think that they're borderline terrified, because there's no clear monetization model that's going to be as effective as what they've been doing for forever, where like, how do you fit 4 or 5 sponsors into a generated result that's going to get any kind of the same level of impact and CTR and all that stuff? And so, is Google going to take the role of sort of like an oil company watching EVs and stuff come on the market? or what happens. I mean, there's already a few startups that are kind of going down this road, like Neva, for example. Bing just partnered with OpenAI apparently. So it seems to be heading there quickly. I mean, maybe I'll start with that and collect your guys' thoughts on it. But like, does search itself fundamentally change as a result of ChatGPT? In the nearish medium-term future.
I'll just try to quickly start. Yeah, it's hard. I don't have a good idea about whether search will change. We were saying before this that it seems like ChatGPT will need a kind of integration partner with the resources to make it able to scale, and that's why obviously they're considering the partnership with Bing, and maybe in the future it becomes part of Bing in some way or whatever else. But on the monetization side, I was just thinking when you were talking then that in the history of, I don't know, the internet, I think there's been multiple moments where we've looked at a new technology or a new kind of content and thought that that's never going to be able to monetize, and then the monetization appeared. Like like in the early days of Facebook, when it was people sharing inane personal updates and telling each other what they have for breakfast and whatever else, we were all like, that's never going to monetize. And then fast forward a number of years later, and obviously that didn't turn out to be a problem. I can't imagine what the monetization will be at the moment. I'm totally with you. It seems very obscure, but it's easy enough to imagine that something will come about. There's a lot of smart people thinking about it, and probably that won't be a concern.
They'll probably just sell ringtones.
Always popular.
That's right.
I agree with Andrew, because we're talking about Google and Microsoft. They'll figure out how to monetize it. I'm not worried for them, but search will change. And I mean, search is something that's anyway evolving slowly. You can see how slowly Google is improving its search, adding things, testing things, and this will just make things move really fast. So it's going to change. I don't think search is completely, I don't think it will be eliminated. I think that there's so many searches that I would never want to ask ChatGPT, and I would want to continue getting multiple links and being able to choose what I'm looking at. But there's a lot of searches that I don't go to Google anymore already. So it's going to change in some way, definitely.
Totally. I mean, we were talking about this before, but I'm so looking forward to not having to sift through 40 ads that load slowly and break the page when I'm like just trying to find a simple recipe, right? Like I just want to know how to make brownies, like, so I think.
But Chris, this one point was really clear the way you laid it out to me in a previous conversation in terms of like the history, like the future of search and how it might change as a result of ChatGPT, where there's this kind of query that's multifaceted that is so much better for ChatGPT to answer than Google. You said about how I'm just parroting you here, so whatever, but it was like if you're going on a holiday and you want to find out like what should I do, or plan me an itinerary for a 10-day trip in Barcelona, given that I really like food and I don't like to walk too much and I'm 63 years old and whatever else. You could get this information from Google, but you're going to run 10 different searches and have to make all different judgments about the quality of the information or whatever. This is a world where you could give it one prompt and you could have all the information immediately. And that seems like the primary place for this technology to change search.
100%. Yeah. And that's just it, right? It's sort of like, we were talking about, Sarah's example with taking, going through all these folders, finding all the stuff, putting it into an organized thing. That's really the value of it is it's like this process automation that just turns a 30-minute to multiple hour task, even with Google, into just an immediate output, right? And it can do it kind of quasi thoughtfully. The one area there, and I know we're not going to shed too many tears for Google and their shareholders, but on the flip side, though, if there are a great number of queries or query categories that turn into these, contained answers with ads and whatever the monetization is for organic publishers, what happens then, right? Because then, I can't really see a world where that leads to more traffic or even the same traffic from search for content publishers, for organic publishers. Thoughts on that?
Sarah?
I was going to say Andrew. Yeah. Wow. It's so difficult to know right now where this is going. I don't think that, like I said before, I don't think that AI can replace humans. I think, wow, it would be so dangerous for that to happen. Like, think about all the power in the hands of the people behind ChatGPT. If everybody's going to them for all the information and opinions, that's like so much more than the power that Google has right now when it decides what search results to show. I mean, this is very different here. ChatGPT is giving you that one answer, and just imagining that people could ask it a question and then everybody would get the same answer, and like there's no room for thinking. Like right now, if I want to form an opinion on something, whether I don't know, politics, environment, I don't know, anything, economics, I'll go to Google and I'll read different opinions and form my own opinion. But to have ChatGPT be the only source of information, wow, I think that's really dangerous. So I mean, that's just one aspect of it. But also the fact that humans can share experiences and perspectives. I don't think all that is going away. It will change, and maybe now we're writing content for certain things that we won't be writing about in the future because AI will be writing it because it makes sense. We were discussing that before as well. But for so many things, it doesn't make sense to not have humans involved. So maybe the writing process will look different. Like writers will use AI as part of the process. And we're not talking about now, we're talking about a few years ahead. So maybe the writing process will look different. Maybe the topics will be different, but I don't think that publishers are going away.
That's a really good point on sort of almost like a morality conundrum around this. It's like, what's the best religion? It's like, yeah, you're right. There will have to be guardrails on or some structure that we're not envisioning now on this sort of answer generation. I mean, I think for sure we see things like build me an itinerary or what's the best Nanaimo bar recipe or whatever. Like that's going to be a thing, no question. But you're right. Like how do you enter those kinds of waters, right? And people are going to they'll use it, right? So it's a tough one.
I can sort of imagine just on that there could be a world coming where it's just not profitable anymore to create content on certain topics, in the same way as I was thinking about old business models like spare parts businesses for appliances or something. And the world became such that if your microwave breaks, there's no point trying to buy a spare part that would fix it. The microwave's so cheap, you just buy a new microwave. But once there was a business that did spare parts for kitchen appliances, whatever, it could be the same where AI is so good at creating this certain kind of content that nobody publishes content written by humans on X topic, whatever it is. And there is still content publishing in the same way there's still, I don't know, kitchen stores, but there's one kind of product that they don't sell, one kind of content we don't create. And so, yeah, who knows, maybe that's on the cards.
Yeah, that's a good point. It could be self-limiting, right? It could sort of, this is a niche where the field of dreams does not apply. I'm building it and no one's coming, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
I think there's sort of, you could run into that. On some of the wider effects, like beyond search UI and stuff, we sort of talked about like the paradox of new technologies that are going to replace us all or replace some group, whoever. And ironically, it makes everyone just way busier, way more productive, but personally, at an individual level, busier, right? So one example, without me drawing it out, but like in the post-war era, there was a bunch of innovation around like home automation, so like washing machines, dryers, dishwashers, etc. And you had this like honeymoon period of like say a decade where people actually had more time and all that kind of stuff, and life was great. And then there was all these second order effects. So like the spouse that was at home during the day, all of a sudden they had the time where they could go out and get a career, right? Or spend their time doing stuff like that. And so that's initially good. All of a sudden, oh, great, we got dual incomes now. But it had interesting effects. So one is it added millions of more people to the workforce, which actually brought wages down because there's more workers. And then the other part of it is eventually to kind of maintain your standard of living, all of a sudden every household needed dual incomes. And so we have this, ironically, it's like, yeah, we all have more time, but what does that end up becoming? And I suspect AI in its own way will do something similar. So instead of writing an article as a writer, now your job is to create like a robotic process for creating content at scale, and you're working even more, right? So thoughts on that?
Sarah?
That might happen. I mean, yeah, that might happen. But so we might end up going through some kind of honeymoon period and then things going back to the way they were before. But in general, the things will get better overall. Like I think the world will be able to do more. We'll be able to get better. Who knows what kind of inventions might come up because of it? Who knows what kind of things we'll be able to do in the future because of it? So in general, I would say it's a good thing, but I don't think that we're all gonna now be able to just relax and sit on the beach all day and that kind of thing. I mean, yeah, I see it as being very similar to the way you described the inventions of home automation. In the end, and at the end, we'll end up working the same amount, but we'll just be doing different things. And I think in general, the world will be more advanced. I'm hoping.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there'll be a mixture of outcomes, but yeah, in general, I agree. I think, the being a Luddite rarely, if ever, maybe never pays off, right? Like,
Right.
yeah.
I'm sympathetic to the Luddites. I don't want to slander them on this podcast, Chris.
Well, thankfully they won't be online to find it. So
That's right. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so some of the things we've also sort of talked about in the longer term is, in some ways like societal effects. So, like what does this mean for, I guess, it, kind of every interaction, whether it's consuming content on social media, whatever. I think now it'll be a real question. It's like, is this a human? Right. And
Right.
so how, like, what does authentication look like? If someone's on Twitter, it's like, is this just like a bot? Or if you're, again, like in the first part, you're reading content, you're reading an article, like, is this just like Skynet telling me to do something, So maybe let's discuss that, sort of like, what do you think this means, or what do you think we'll do to solve it potentially? Kind of like the human badge online.
I had a scary thought before when Sarah, you were talking about how you realized the way that you were talking to ChatGPT suddenly. You were just giving it these commands with no manners. You were just do this for me, do that for me. And it caught me because I noticed the same thing. I was just suddenly writing, yeah, tell me this, suggest me this. No, please and thank you. And then I worried, what if this starts to change the way that we interact with each other? If we form these patterns of typing and speaking, what if suddenly we're on IM or on WhatsApp or whatever, and this is how we talk to each other all of a sudden, and that filters through to our in-person interactions? That's a dark world, not even basic manners. Ugh.
Well, now you understand why us programmers talk the way we do, because we're used to doing that. I was recently asking ChatGPT for ideas for a domain name, and I said, give me 10 ideas for domain name for whatever. And then it gave it to me, and my answer was 10 more. So
that's so good. I also loved in that story where you said that when it wrote back to you, it said, sorry, I meant, like, it was using its manners to you, even though you gave it nothing.
It does. I don't think we're going to start talking like this to humans.
Okay.
I'm
Good.
Optimistic.
If even you feel that way, that's a positive.
Except for people who already talk this way.
Yeah, well, I don't know what that says about you then.
Oh.
Yeah. I wonder if Chris needs to ask ChatGPT where is...
All right. Here we are talking about the forefront of technology, and my audio is back now that my headphones are thrown in the garbage. So anyway, we're going to close off by each of us thinking about or talking about kind of the main thing that's on our mind with what ChatGPT means, and also kind of what we're looking for as indicators or kind of maybe red flags, or just in general, things that we're looking to see happen or looking to see, might happen. I'll go first. I mean, I think in general for me, this is kind of like a Napster moment, I think, where we've all witnessed something that we don't quite understand what it's going to do, but we know that it's going to do something big, right? I remember the first time using Napster as a kid, and obviously you're not thinking about like the business impact, but even then it was pretty apparent. It's like, this changes music forever, and peer-to-peer sharing is something that's going to be huge, right? Like anyone can kind of see that. And the first time you start typing in questions and commands and whatever into ChatGPT, it's one of those experiences. And I do think this fundamentally changes marketing from a procedural and output level in many ways. Obviously it doesn't go away, but as far as kind of how one needs to adapt to that, there's going to be adaptation no matter where you are in the value chain, right? Even thinking about, like, let's say you're at the C-suite level, you're even like VC, you're investing in companies, like, does the team get what's happening? Like, do they understand how to adapt and sort of what is happening in their space? Or like, even at that level, it matters. Things I'm looking for as this all unfolds, I really think there's going to be a content singularity of sorts. And I'm wondering if that, do we just oversupply the market so that traffic is actually pretty difficult to generate organically? Or does the kind of telescope of these search engines kind of narrow, right? Is it going to become a little more elitist, where it's trusted sites, it's trusted people, it's that kind of stuff? So I'm going to be looking for basically how Google reacts to this, because I think we're going to see an absolute explosion of content volume. And I want to see if they sort of go with a less is more approach, or if there's more focus on authentication, either at a domain or like a personal level. Like, what does it mean to be publishing credible stuff, and how is Google going to determine that, given where we're headed? So that's what I'm looking at. That's kind of what's on my mind right now. Sarah, do you want to go?
I think we're all thinking about how's Google going to handle this. What's on my mind the most is the I just keep thinking of more applications and what are we going to be able to do with this thing as a society? What big breakthroughs are going to come up because of this? And in addition, in terms of content on the internet, in addition to what Google's going to do with it, which is, I mean, everybody's like trying to figure out what it is going to do. I'm also curious about how people will use it, because what are people going to use ChatGPT for? And how? And what are people going to use Google search engines for? And how? And the third thing that I'm interested in is how will search engines integrate this technology into their own products? How will Google integrate AI into search? Like what will I assume search will look different in the future? What it will look like, and how will we as content publishers adapt to that? All very interesting questions.
Totally. Andrew?
Yeah. The thing I'm thinking about most every day is, and being in the content business, is essentially how many ways are there that we could bring down the cost of creating really high quality content? So this is a short-term concern. For me, this is long before we know to what extent AI is going to replace human writers. Up until then, I'm thinking every day, what else is there? What other prompts can we use? What other parts of the content creation and publishing process can we deploy this to create really good quality stuff at a lower cost? Because the better you can do that, the better the content businesses can do.
Yeah.
Totally. And even like the format of what that is, right? It's like, we were talking about this before, it's, let's say you're Stephen King and you already use ghostwriters to a degree, right? And, or maybe entirely, I don't know. But the thing, like, just in that perspective, like, it's already understood that authoritative, household name authors are basically a brand, and there's content production that happens and editing and all research, whatever. There's a team underneath it. And so really, what's the difference between, a team, automation tools, whatever? It's like the author now becomes like a visionary or almost like a manager of this process. And so in that sense, it's like, every article, every essay that gets published or whatever, the authors, in a sense, it's like you've assembled this thing with whatever resources, people, tools, ChatGPT, Skynet, whatever, that's how it came together. And so you can still put your name on it and that still means something. So it's, I think Google's shift at a policy level or like a guidance level, adding that one word, spammy, into that description of things they don't want, and behind automated content, that's a big deal, right? Like this is, I think they realize that this is unstoppable, and it's more about the end result, the outcome for the user. So yeah, to your point, like, what does this mean for high production, high value content creation? My question, my kind of other thought is like, if it gets so much more affordable, it's like, again, it's the idea of like, inflation, right? Are we going to see like content hyperinflation in this sense, right? Even though it's going to be good. So anyway, just a lot there. I don't think we're going to conclusively solve anything anytime soon, but just so much cool stuff happening right now. I mean, it's amazing actually how fast this has sort of taken over the zeitgeist of probably every industry, but certainly marketing. But anyway, that's my bit. Anyway, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just excited to see what comes next, and excited to do more of the experimentation. It's fun being on the feeling like anyway you're on the front lines of this new technology and the new innovation, and getting to find out some of the outcomes yourself early on. That's nice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm also really excited about it. Use it every day, all day long, asking it questions and trying to get it to do as many things for me as possible. So also very excited about this.
Sarah, I heard someone say today, and we can fact check this, but apparently maybe you heard that the cost of each query on ChatGPT is something like 2 cents already in resources for them. And when you said that, I was just thinking, if they're breaking down their costs by user, Sarah Young is like right there at the top, just draining the resources, just crushing them.
We're trying to break it. Like my kids and I, we're trying to break it. We had this riddle. There's this game, a thinking game that we were playing, and there's a way to always win, and we were trying to play it against ChatGPT, and we told them you must win 100% of the time. When it realized that it couldn't win, it just didn't do anything and generated an error message. Like we're having fun with it.
Ridiculous.
It took its backpack and went home. That's what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. I'm definitely up there.
Toddler GPT. Yeah, awesome.
Awesome.
That's great. Well, Andrew, Sarah, thank you so much. This is awesome. I suspect my prediction for the future is that we'll all three of us be back again to revisit this a few times, and I think there'll be some fascinating stuff that's happened. Some of it will be what we've, I think, projected, and most of it will be stuff that we couldn't have even imagined envisioning, which is the exciting part. Thank you so much, and yeah, I'm sure we'll chat again soon.